The newsagents.
The ballots are now opened in the race to be the Tory leader. Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick are both urging Tory members to get out and vote.
But here we have two candidates from the right of the Conservative Party, when electoral history in this country shows that elections are won around the centre. So can Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick lead the Tories back to power? Welcome to the newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily. And Kemi Badenoch is saying it's time to tell the truth. She has put out a video over the past week which sets her out as a woman of substance and a woman who is not scared to, I guess, sort of grab the country by the balls a bit, right? Metaphorically.
Why don't you say grab the bull by the horns rather than the balls?
Okay, we could try that. And Robert Jenrick is asking her to debate. You know, he wants to have a debate on the BBC, he wants to have a debate on the Sun thing. He wants to have a debate everywhere, which suggests that he feels possibly that he is behind at this point. And I guess this is a race that most people in the country will not notice and will not care about because they will not be involved. They are not the electorate.
And of course, what this election is about is no longer about the MPs at Westminster.
Yeah.
They've had their say, and we saw the démarche of that last week when James Cleverly went from being the front runner to being knocked out in a bizarre set of circumstances, which we discussed on the newsagents last week when it happened. But it's now up to the membership. And the membership of the Conservative Party is to the right of the parliamentary party. And therefore, you've got Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, both of the right, obviously trying to pander to the right-wing instincts of the electorate. The question is, does it make them in any way electable if you win elections from the centre ground?
Well, the man who used to relish showing us his Galaxy phone, complete with spreadsheets, he was the counter of votes. He was the man, you know, in the words of Lyndon Baines Johnson, who knew how to count, was running James Cleverly's campaign until suddenly he wasn't. And it exploded. But he is nevertheless trying to work out, through his new movement, Conservatives Together, how to get his party back into power. And so today we're going to ask what the plan is and what he thinks of the people that are now left in the race. He's Grant Shapps, of course. Yesterday we were talking to Graham Brady on the newsagents, and he was reminding us, I mean, by his very presence, that your party had 5 prime ministers in 14 years. And I wonder if you'd accept that that was a sign of failure. I mean, you can talk about COVID, you can talk about Ukraine, you can talk about Brexit, but fundamentally you inflicted 5 different prime ministers on the UK.
Yeah, and you know, I agree. It's not what you want to do. You want to come into government. You want to have that consistency. Of course, you know, David Cameron essentially fell on his sword. He lost the Brexit vote. We all know the stories with Boris Johnson and the way that he ended up resigning, and the rest is history with Liz and with Rishi. But so yes, I agree. It's not what you want to do. The difference is when you're in government. Pressures are very, very different to opposition. I think it's really interesting. In just 100 days, you know, Keir Starmer's discovered it's not nearly as easy as it looks from the other side of the chamber, being in power, and things which, you know, don't get that much scrutiny when you're in opposition. In government, come under 100, 1,000 times the level of scrutiny, and it's not as easy as it looks, which is, I think, exactly what Labour's discovered in the first 3 months.
But you said in your concession speech that Tory MPs had created an endless political soap opera out of internal rivalries and divisions which have become increasingly indulgent and entrenched. It's no different now, is it? I mean, you look at the leadership contest that's unfolding and the ideological divisions, the entrenched interests, the personal animosities are still there.
Well, actually, I don't agree with that, actually. I think it's true to say that this leadership contest has been reasonably cathartic. You saw at the Conservative Party conference there was actually almost like an over-optimism, given that we're at the start of 4 or 5 years where we're out of power. You wouldn't have thought that from the mood at the conference, and lots of journalists who've been at the
Did you feel it
conference
was
commented on
cathartic
that.
when James Cleverly went down?
Well, no, but the difference is, and why I think you're wrong on this, is that, you know, in a leadership contest, you kind of expect there to be a debate. It's the point of it. So we shouldn't sort of somehow decry it as if it's a bad idea to have a difference of opinions when it comes to a leadership election. You are trying to provide a difference of opinions so people can decide who to vote for. My disappointment actually is that we've ended up with two candidates, both of whom present themselves from the same side of the party as they currently are presenting, which I think is a pity. But nonetheless, you can't criticise open debate in a leadership contest. That's the point of a leadership contest.
And would you be thinking now that the way leaders are chosen has to change? Would you be taking the membership out of this?
I
Or would
do
you
two
say
things.
saying the MPs don't deserve the
Yeah.
vote?
So I don't, in the end, I don't think just because it doesn't end up being the person that you'd like to see that was chairing James Cleverly's campaign, I don't think just because it doesn't go your way, that means you have to start calling for a change in leadership rules. But I do think there are actually two sensible changes that should and could be made. One is our threshold to spark a leadership election whilst in government, or rather just once the leader's in place, is lower than it is for the other parties. So I think Labour require 20% of MPs. I think I'm right in saying we only require 15%. I think the threshold's too low. The second thing I'd say is it is insane to go through a process when you are in power to not only have the MP, which of course you have to, but then to go out to the entire membership, expect the country just to be on standby, standstill, whilst the Tory party decides what the heck it's going to do. And of course, that's what we saw happen twice in or once in 2022. And of course,
So
there were two changes.
fundamentally, Grant, you are trying to work out the blueprint to get your party back into power. And there is real division within the party as to which way that should be. I mean, I guess most people around the country would look and say that the majority of those seats at the general election were taken by progressive parties like Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, except you now have two candidates who feel that they're pretty much only talking to the electorate about reform. Is that going to be a big issue for you?
So, look, I'm really clear that, if we're going to win again or to win again, we need to stick to our electoral territory. And Conservatives, I think actually one of the reasons why the Conservative Party has ended up in power longer than anyone else, and as a fact is the oldest democratic political party in the world, is because we've always been very good at being where the country is, and that is somewhere to the centre right. And that's kind of, and when Labour win, it's because they move on to our territory. That's what Starmer's done. It's what Blair did. And when we lose, it's because we go off in some sort of tangent. And so, I'm pretty sure, well, I hope rather, regardless of whether it's Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch, that they understand that the place to win in Britain is on the centre right, but not on the extremes.
Are you worried that they don't?
We'll have to see. I mean, look, again, my first choice candidate was somebody who was much more in the centre ground, but I actually do hope and expect that either Kemi or Rob would have that sort of, good common sense, really, to get us in a place that the country would willingly and gladly back, particularly now they had a taste of what the so-called change is supposed to be under Labour, and it ain't as good as it was advertised.
Maybe I should know the answer to this, but I don't. Who are you backing?
I haven't declared for either of them, actually, and I'm genuinely in two minds about who to vote for.
What? Hang on. In what way?
Just genuinely haven't decided who I'll vote for when the ballot arrives. I mean, there's a choice of two people. They both have their pros and cons.
What it sounds like, Grant, is we know where they position themselves in order to get the members to vote for them. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets it will have to really reshuffle what they've been saying if they actually do want to do what you're saying, which is appeal to the wider electorate. And by reshuffle, I mean row back, U-turn or lie.
I think actually it's been one of the fundamental problems that Starmer's had, which is he did exactly what you've just described in a different way. So on a solidly socialist platform, twice was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet, or rather over two parliaments, and then moved to the centre ground, and as I just described, moved to the centre right in order to look as if he was,
Well, maybe we should ask those
free of
questions to
danger.
Labour. But when it comes to your
Yeah,
party, right, you've
yeah.
got you've got Robert Jenrick, who's gone all out on leaving the ECHR. You've got Kemi Badenoch, who's been pretty strident about the kind of cultures that should or shouldn't feel welcome in this country. I mean, no wonder you're having problems trying to choose between them. Which one of those is more electable?
No, I'm rather agreeing with your point. I think it's caused Keir Starmer a lot of problems
Mm.
because he's done exactly what you've described. And it is, I think, though, the case equally that for either Kemi or for Rob, they will need to attract the vast mass of the country. I mean, people make a big fuss about and rightly so. No one wants to see us take votes from us, but about Reform, who have like 4 or 5 seats, and the Lib Dems have over 70 seats. So if
Right.
you want to know where the votes are, follow the maths.
So just to be clear, where Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch are now, they are unelectable. They have to move to the centre right, which is where you say elections in this country, and historically, you're right to say it, are won.
Yes, I don't think, don't put words in my mouth. I don't think they're unelectable. I wouldn't want that to be a kind of headline out of this chat. I think they are electable as long as they have sense to understand that in order to win the country, you need to be centre right, but not off to an extreme. And Emily quite rightly raises the issue then of, well, you said one thing to get elected, and then I point out, well, Keir's done the same thing, and I don't think it's done Keir, much good actually, because in the end, these things end up catching up with you. It's better to have a consistent position
So,
and
Grant, I'm hearing
stay
then
in
that
that position.
you're basically knocking on Ed Davies' door and saying, how did you do that? How do we become more like the Lib Dems? Right? Is that what you're looking for now? A proper
Yes.
ground
Well,
game?
I certainly wouldn't in policy terms want to become like the Lib Dems, to be perfectly clear. But what the sort of Conservatives Together, the report that we published, was really saying was, let's learn the lessons of what went wrong in campaigning terms. Well, I mean, cut through what you'd need to do by 2028, 2029. I mean, what will AI look like, and how will that be being used, and how do you run campaigns in this sort of newer world? So we're really interested in the nuts and bolts of it. I don't think the answer is to be like the Lib Dems, or in fact like Reform or any other party. That we just need to be centre-right Conservatives,
Do
in
you wish you
particular.
hadn't spoken about immigration in the same terms and the same rhetoric as we heard Rishi Sunak do in the last 18 months?
I always thought that to have a platform which literally says stop the boats. Yes, it's something that courts we absolutely have to see done, but unless you are absolutely confident of doing it and doing it before you go to the country, then it's going to cause problems. Immigration is a far more complex subject than, I mean, illegal immigration, of course, it should stop, obviously, but immigration is a far more complex subject. I'm sitting in front of a Ukrainian flag here. Um, we let willingly, like a lot of Ukrainians, into this country, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and people applauded it and still do.
In the election campaign, you caused eyebrows to raise, and I suspect consternation in Downing Street when you first mooted the idea of Labour heading for a landslide victory, which of course is what turned out to happen. You're pretty good and pretty candid about the state of political play. Do you think that by 2028, 2029, whenever the next general election comes, that it's conceivable the Tories can win? Well, I mean, just as things are, overturning a mountain like that is not going to be easy.
So, first of all, just to correct the record, there was no great constellation that I'm aware of. In fact, Downing Street adopted the language, albeit about a week later or something. But there wasn't. There was no one ever came back to me, by the way, and said, "I wish you hadn't said that." In fact, people sort of started to use the language very quickly. Do I think it's possible? I think coming out of straight after the election and looking at the size, the scale of Starmer's majority, it looked very difficult. One of the really interesting things that we found, actually, we did the work in this sort of what went wrong report for Conservatives Together was largely based around interviews of candidates in the election, but we also did some quantitative work in here. And here it is on page 8. What it shows is you'd only need 1% of voters who are registered to vote, to have voted Conservative in that election, in the right places, of course, to have hung Parliament, and 2%, and we could have had a whole overall majority. So Starmer has this vast, wide majority. It's incredibly shallow. So the majorities that he has in many, many, many seats are small. So I think actually, having had 3 months to think this through and do some quantitative research, and seen, of course, how difficult Labour are actually finding it now. Very, who'd have thought in this kind of months, 100 days later. Yeah, I do think it's possible. Although I do also concede it's not the most likely outcome yet.
Once a new leader's stepped in place, Rishi Sunak will probably step down. Will you go for his seat?
I don't know that he will necessarily step down. I hear people say this a lot, but I don't know even that Rishi has decided what he'll do. And as for me, look, I've come out of being on the front line for a very, very long time, and I'm actually sort of enjoying the freedom of my life as it is now. So I'm not in any tearing rush. I have said, and I'll say again, I don't feel my days of public service are necessarily over. I do still have the itch for it, and I enjoy what I do in public service, but I'm in no rush. So
whenever
I
he
really
goes.
don't know. We'd have to wait and see.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All the best. If you walk past a newspaper stand, you will see staring out at you from the Times, the Sun, the Guardian and the Mail, to name but 4, the figure and face of Taylor Swift, as if she is just starting her Eras tour right now in London. But this isn't a story about Taylor Swift. It's a story about the Prime Minister and whether or not he was wrong to have a 10-minute chat with her and her mother after a concert to which he had received free tickets. And the reason that it's being discussed is in the light of a rumbling story about Taylor Swift's security during the weeks that she was here, that she had blue light security. In other words, the what
It was
do I
good.
mean?
It was good that you gave the sound effects.
It was going well till then.
Blues and twos, they
Blues
call
and twos. I've lost the crowd now. But broadly, should she have had the police escort that is normally reserved for cabinet ministers, for the royal family and all the rest of it, when she is just a pop star? And to put this in some context, Taylor Swift, when she had received that level of security, had just had to cancel concerts in Austria where there were perceived to be terrorist threats and people were subsequently arrested. But it's all got slightly murky because it involves the question of whether the Home Secretary bent the rules to give her the blues and twos, brand new phrase for me, in order to then sort of get freebies, get tickets, right?
So let's do a quick timeline. Because Taylor Swift came to the UK, went off, did more of the Eras tour, and then came back to the UK.
And in that time, Keir Starmer
became Prime Minister. So when there was the photo of him with Victoria at this concert, I think that was back in June, when she was first over here. He went to her concert again, and this time he spent 10 minutes backstage with her at that event. But it was just after the Vienna concert had been cancelled and there had been a terrorist threat and people were arrested and have been charged with terrorism offences in Austria as a result of what unfolded that day. And there was a credible terrorist, serious plot to have killed thousands of people at a Taylor Swift concert. Spool forward to Wembley. She's going to come. Understandably, there is concern over security. How it was arrived at that she got blue flashing lights taking her to and from Wembley Stadium, I don't know. But it's all been tied into the whole sort of freebie gate narrative, which is the bit I find odd. Because I think that with the suits, there was bad judgment on Keir Starmer's part. What was he doing getting his clothes paid for? The glasses, similarly, other things as well. And it's like the media have tried to find the latest hook to keep the freebie gate story going. And that somehow him meeting a pop singer is part of the freebie gate. Or is it that he got blues and twos for her? Or is the suggestion that because he'd met her backstage, weeks later, he arranged that as a payback? It just gets preposterous.
Okay, so the Prime Minister's office is telling us that the 10-minute chat that he had with Taylor Swift, which came in the wake of those horrific Southport stabbings, which you'll remember was at a dance class for little girls, which was Taylor Swift themed. In other words, presumably they were sort of doing their dances to her songs. Now, the Prime Minister says that that's what they discussed for 10 minutes. End of. It was the only thing that was discussed, and presumably it was, a sort of chat of commiseration or horror or whatever was going on there. I think one of the things that we have to kind of do is step away from this idea that Taylor Swift is not as powerful as she actually is, and therefore probably is a massive, terrorist threat magnet. She has probably as much sway as a head of state. I mean, her following, her audiences, her crowd, her influence is the equivalent of being a head of state. So, I mean, if you look at the papers, what's really been sort of funny for me is that they show her in her most spanglied, starry bikini outfits, which is obviously how she performs, and then says, Starmer goes for a Swiftie with Swift, or, a sort of 10-minute chat, as if there's something sort of really lewd, as if he was sort of going backstage to sort of catch her in her bikini. And maybe that's me sort of over-interpreting. That's just kind of how I saw those pictures. But I don't think it's that odd for Keir Starmer to be meeting Taylor Swift when she comes to this country. Just like I wouldn't think it was odd to meet Bill Gates or Elon Musk. And I wonder whether there's also this edge of misogyny. It's like she's just a pop star. Honestly, she isn't just a pop star. She's probably the most influential woman in the world. I think it'd be slightly odd if your Prime Minister wasn't actually encountering the person who was coming to do their tour at Wembley and generating billions and billions for the economy as she was doing it, right?
And also, I mean, you could argue that it was sort of slightly demeaning for the Prime Minister to be doing it on her turf. It would have been perfectly normal for Keir Starmer to have said, Taylor Swift is in town. She's an extraordinary worldwide phenomenon and has a political voice in America, which she is using. It wouldn't have been unusual or exceptional. It would have seemed to me for him to invite her to number 10 Downing Street and have a cup of coffee or whatever. Yeah. That is what Prime Ministers do. They meet with world leaders. They meet with kind of leading figures from culture and arts.
Obama met with Lin-Manuel Miranda. Now, you might be kind of like vomiting at the whole kind of liberal intelligentsia image of that. Lin-Manuel Miranda was the composer and the actor of Hamilton, right?
And Elvis Presley went and saw Richard Nixon in the White House.
Right.
And he went with a gun in his pocket and the Secret Service didn't know what to do, that Elvis had arrived armed at the White House.
And Tony Blair famously, of course, had
Cool Britannia
and all the Oasis lads hanging around Downing Street, right? I mean, we kind of get that that's what happens. I don't think it's just a Labour phenomenon. I'm trying to
go back and look at photos at the height of Beatlemania in the 1960s when they arrived back at Heathrow. They had police escorts because there were so many thousands of kids screaming. They had police escorts. To use the American parlance, I think that Keir Starmer taking 32,000 quid's worth of clothes was a something burger. Him meeting Taylor Swift is a nothing burger. And I wondered whether, was it possible today that Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's questions would go on this subject? No, he went on the dangers in the Straits of Taiwan. Let's get this into proportion.
Well, no, I think that is really interesting. I mean,
the Straits of Taiwan is really important.
No, but I think that honestly, I think Rishi is going out of his way to not pick a fight. I mean, there are plenty of things he could have gone on. Right? He could have gone on tax rises. He could have gone on the budget. He could have gone on, what we're hearing about the sort of the exodus of wealth from the country. He could have gone on Taylor Swift. He goes on something which they're so unified on. There's barely a cigarette paper between them. I mean, you have to wonder why that's happening.
Of course, that's a separate point. The only point I'm making is that, you kind of think about the great issues detaining the nation's attention. Is it the Straits of Taiwan, which is a really important geopolitical issue, or is it the fact that Keir Starmer had 10 minutes with Taylor Swift?
Okay, I'm gonna pull you up on that because I think we do talk in that gossipy way about scandals, right? Whether it's the MP's expenses, whether it is Boris Johnson's wallpaper, whether it's the perception, and I think this is this is obviously at the heart of this, isn't it? The perception is that Keir Starmer comes into office saying it's all going to be different now. The Tories are out. Those sleazy good-for-nothings are done for. You're going to find a very different person in me. And the question I have today is, are people genuinely feeling that Keir Starmer is just more of the same, that he has let them down, that this is, not a good look for a brand new Labour Prime Minister? Or are we slightly getting sucked into a right-leaning media press narrative which was already formed? It was already formed over, Currygate, and 10 days ago did Keir Starmer, Starmer have a curry and a beer during COVID.
Angela Rayner's council house sale.
Yeah, that's what I can't work out. I genuinely can't work it out.
So it feels to me, I think that's absolutely the right question to be asking, because it feels to me that there is... The mistake that Starmer has made is he's given the space for this to happen. That they're all the same, they've all got their noses in the trough, they're all self-seeking, they can't trust the bloody word that any of them say, there's no difference between any of them. And I think that actually Starmer sort of has filled the forms in. He hasn't tried to hide the money he's received.
He's done it by the book.
He's still done it. But he's done dumb stuff.
Yeah.
What he's done is dumb, and that's opened up the space. But if you were to say, OK, you mentioned Wallpapergate. The whole thing about wallpaper was we didn't find out for months afterwards, and it led to the resignation.
It was a lie.
Of his ethics advisor over what the truth of it was, that Boris Johnson had willingly concealed what had happened and hidden away certain texts and exchanges that had taken place between Lord Brownlow and Johnson. Now that was just plain dishonest.
Yeah.
And it led to the resignation of the ethics advisor. What Keir Starmer has done is dumb, and it's allowed a right-leaning press to go, oh, look at him.
Okay, so the question is, should they have been onto it quicker?
Yes.
Was there a way of shutting this down quicker? I don't know how you shut that down any more than they have, than by saying, the money's gone back and this is enough. As you said, this is a nothing burger. We chatted about the Southport stabbings. I'm struggling to see what we think that he should have done on top of that would shut the story down. Because frankly, if he says that and then columnists are still writing about it, we're still talking about it, the pictures are still on the front page, and who isn't going to put a picture of Taylor Swift, frankly, on the front of their paper wearing a spangly bikini, right? So what else should he be doing that would close that void rather than over talking about it?
Well, this goes back to stuff we were talking about at the time of the Labour Party conference, which is you get out in front of it. It didn't seem to me necessary that if he's accepted hospitality from Universal Music to go and see Taylor Swift, seems to me perfectly reasonable. He's paid back the money to go to Doncaster Racecourse. I didn't see the necessity to do that, but because it made him look like he was guilty. There are dying embers of a story, and suddenly someone's come along with the bellows, and the flames have come back up again. And that's what Keir Starmer has done wrong in terms of the media presentation of all of this.
Look, he's swapped chiefs of staff in the middle of all this, right? So you forget that Sue Gray, what was it, only last week? Was it last week? Yeah. Right? Sue Gray went, and Morgan McSweeney's taken over her place now, and sort of re-entered as the chief of staff, having been in that position once before already. And so either you say, oh goodness, hands on hips, can nobody get this right? Or else you say, is this actually about something slightly different? Is this about a real disquiet with whatever is coming in the budget from some of the papers, that they've got nothing to go on yet? We know there's going to be tax rises. We've talked about employer contribution rises to national insurance. But is this kind of filling a void where people are getting sort of itchy about the budget and make it into a kind of like, look how he's spending your money? Look how he's spending your money.
I think it's a bit more than that. I think it is.
Although obviously it's not public money, we should say it was, gifted money.
So look, I think it's absolutely true that an awful lot of people thought that Keir Starmer was very high and mighty when he was promising that he was going to bring back order and government and process and cleanliness to the way that the affairs of our nation are conducted.
We sort of wanted a monk.
And you know, immediately, kind of within the first 100 days, we found out about, you know, Wahid Ali and him getting a Downing Street pass, Wahid Ali and £32,000 worth of clothes, Wahid Ali and the glasses, Wahid Ali and his flat. You know, and it's been a very convenient peg to hang it on. And Taylor Swift is but the latest manifestation of this. I think some of it has substance. I'm not sure that him meeting Taylor Swift backstage at Wembley has much to it.
We've got a back page press story coming to you after the break.
Through 5 years of total war, Winston Churchill has led our people to their greatest victory after some of the darkest hours in our history.
Well, I'm afraid it is another dark day for England, or so says the back page of the Daily Mail today. They are talking about a 3 Lions gamble on, block capitals, a German. And that is because Thomas Tuchel has just been announced as the new England manager.
People are kind of, dare I say it, losing their shit over this a bit, aren't they? You know, if you go to football, you want the best manager and you want the best players that you can have. We've had Fabio Capello, we've had Sven-Göran Eriksson. Why suddenly is it Thomas Tuchel that is getting us very irate and hot under the collar?
How insulting, ignorant, unforgivably short-sighted, asks the Mail. Because they agree that Gareth Southgate gave us our national team identity, whereas if Tuchel comes in, he will probably try and make all the players German. He will probably make them drive German cars.
Wear lederhosen.
Maybe wash their dishes in German dishwashers.
Drink steins of lager.
Yes, I think that's what's going to happen. I think our whole national side will end up speaking German.
Well, what a thought that will be. But make the news conferences very interesting when you're... How is it? How do you say it was a game of two halves in German?
I mean, whatever next, you have to ask, will the Germans then come into our royal family?
Yes, that would be, I mean, heaven forfend.
Heaven forfend.
Heaven
right?
forfend that would ever happen.
It's the thin end of the wedge. It is a slippery, as I like to say, slope.
Although I would look forward to reading the Daily Mail headline if we win the next World Cup with Thomas Tuchel as the manager. It's going to be awkward,
isn't it?
It's going to be this.
Despite the German at their helm.
I think there will be convenient amnesia.
Right, Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
As we say. Bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.